All right, good morning, and welcome to all of you who have tuned in this morning for today's statewide technical assistance for STRTP programs in California. Hopefully you're here for the third in a series of peer-to-peer learning and leadership presentations. Today's content is trauma-informed care for community-based residential service providers, and we welcome you. We're here with the support of a number of organizations, including the CCR branch at the Department of Social Services, the California Alliance for Child and Family Services, and the Child and Family Policy Institute of California. My name is Richard Connect, and I'll be hosting the presentation this morning. Very briefly, the technical assistance approach that the state has implemented with the direction of its partners involves statewide technical assistance designed to enhance and ensure that STRTP leaders across the state have access to and implement consistent organizational leadership practices in support of the young people who are in need of STRTP care. The approach was developed with the support of the Continuum of Care Reform State County Leadership Team, and they agreed on a number of guiding principles, which you see reflected here in this slide. We won't review these in detail, but they're just provided for your reference so that you know there is a well-articulated understanding about the purpose and intent of our STRTP best practices. The course content for the series that's being delivered this year comes to us via the experience the state had a number of years ago with its RBS implementation, and we are guided further by the Continuum of Care Reform principles, by national and state research on system of care and wraparound approaches, and by additional research into best practices for young people in residential care. The result of that inquiry yielded a set of 10 organizational competencies, which you see reflected here. We have had prior presentations this year on agency provider partnership and family engagement. And today's presentation is, of course, on trauma-informed services. We're here and thrilled to have as presenters today the leadership team at the Hannah Boys Center. They're represented by Brian Farragher, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Hannah Boys Center and is a nationally known researcher and writer in trauma. He's joined by Dr. Stephanie Smith, who is the Chief Clinical Officer at the Hannah Boys Center, and by Scott Singer, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Hannah Boys Center. And we're thrilled to have them present the Hannah experience. They are joined further by Dr. Ken Epstein, who's recently retired from the San Francisco Department of Public Health, where he ran the Children's System of Care. He is a consultant and trainer. And so we're pleased to have our presenters talk to us today about the Hannah experience, and we'll transition the slide controls over to the team at Hannah and turn the controls over to you guys. Brian, good morning.
Good morning. So hopefully that worked. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for calling in, and thanks to DSS for inviting us to do this. We're excited to share what we've been working on here. I've been here at Hannah for about 5 years and worked a lot with trauma-informed care back east. My mentor is Sandy Bloom, and we did a lot of work together before I came out here. So this is something kind of near and dear to my heart. And I think one of the real challenges that we face here and frankly in our industry is we are battling a really strong and very long history of using coercive practices in care, and so we have that kind of in our DNA as an industry, and so battling through that and changing that is not for the faint of heart. And I'm very lucky. I get to work with some really wonderful people here at Hannah, and who I've worked kind of shoulder to shoulder with over the last many years. And so I'm going to turn this over in a couple of minutes to that. Well, first to Scott. Scott Singer is our Chief Operating Officer and has been here at Hannah for 36 years. And so he has kind of been on both sides of this, and I'm sure some of his comments will talk a little bit about that transition. And then Dr. Stephanie Smith has a really impressive background in the area of trauma treatment, and she joined us about a year ago. So we're and has really helped us to refine what we're doing. So we're still firmly in the middle of this, but we're excited about the direction we're moving. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott now to kind of just get us started, and then we'll transition to the rest of us a little bit later. So, Scott.
Thank you, Brian. My hope here is to familiarize you folks a little bit about Hannah, because I think we're all working with traumatized and troubled young children. And Hannah itself started back in 1945 in Menlo Park after two Catholic priests, Father William O'Connor and Father William Flanagan, discovered that we had just a increasing number of wayward and abandoned young men. And this was after following World War II. These young men had lost their fathers, their uncles, their brothers, and because of that, they lost the supervision, the structure, the consistency. They just had too much time on their hands, and they really needed a guidance to help them get back on track. These boys were often referred to as the forgotten boy. So these two priests, Father Flanagan and O'Connor, laid this problem out to the Archbishop Mitty at the time, and they did get a plan, and they started in 1945, and it really expanded because the need was obvious that they needed to expand a program to be a center, and that's where we're currently at today. And they expanded their dream, a unique home for children, a private, faith-based organization known to many as the Boys Town of the West, and we're currently still here 75 years later here at Hannah Boys Center in the beautiful Sonoma Mountains. We talk about, again, the importance of who we are and unique is that we have we're unique because we don't take private funds. We are privately funded. Excuse me. We are privately funded. We take no public funds. Because of this, it makes us unique. We go with our direct mail program. We get money from Bequest. We only get about $500 or less in tuition from the actual clients and their families. So that shows you itself how much it's a gift to be at Hannah Center. We do have 84 beds currently at Hannah Center. Our young men that do come to us do come with trauma and adversity. Again, it's not what's wrong with them, it's what's happened to them. So they come with us with attachment issues, affect regulation issues, cognitive issues, disassociation, self-actualization. Again, they are privately placed, and they are in our mission statement states that Hannah Boys Center changes the lives of troubled, motivated youth through faith, education, and caring, helping them grow into productive members of society. They still do obviously come with their problems. And quite a few of our young men are very behind in school as well. So they come with a challenge. We are very
Scott, this is Richard. Sorry for the interruption. Can we ask you to just move a little closer to the microphone? We're getting just a little bit of feedback that we need you just a little more clearly.
Testing. Is this good here?
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Good deal. Okay, well, thank you. And I hope everybody picked up the last part I had on there, but that's okay. I'm going to jump into what we do. And again, we are a residential facility. As you see on that photo there, there's a lot of activities we do, and I'll share that photo up there on the right-hand corner. That's the 1951 International Fire Engine that was donated to us, and we do that every July 4th with our young men and go through the parade. So that's one little highlight I'll give you there. So again, we'll jump to what we do. Again, as I said, we're a residential facility. It takes a lot of staff to do that. Our talented youth counselors, 40 full-time equivalent plus. We have our treatment team of our school, our clinicians, our alumni association follow-on program, our support services. We do have a full health clinic on campus. We have our kitchen, we have our maintenance crew, and obviously the folks that raise our money. So again, residential services, it takes quite a bit. We are blessed to have our school on campus, as I mentioned, and part of having our school on campus now, we are able to look at a new program that's a competency-based education program. A new student that comes in here will meet with the principal and lead teachers and instructional assistant and special and academic specialists and counselors. They too are trying to figure out their trauma-informed care systems as well in there, and obviously it's the whole child. We work with them on equity and social justice as well. Clinical department matches up the young men after about a week with the best clinician. They work more directly with them one-on-one and with families. Our recreation and activities program, we are a school, so we are in CIF interscholastic teams. Our boys participate in soccer and basketball and baseball with other high schools. We had a very, very successful wrestlers that have come out of our program. Also, we have our volleyball and our flag football clubs for other young men. But again, for our non-athletes, we have a variety of things, anywhere from art, and wood shop, and welding, music, computer science. We're blessed to be able to do that. And also, we have a very, very good FFA program for our future farmers of America. Talking about our rich tradition, again, I can't help but mention our ministry services under the direction of Father Greg McGivern and our dedicated campus ministry staff. They too are able to understand that each boy that comes in here, we respect their faith background, and we offer an array of ways to build awareness about spirituality. And that's through our Thursday community service and our Sunday gatherings, as well as these young men get out to the community, our surrounding community, and help with Pets Lifeline. They help the senior communities, and actually lately too, they've been making lunches for the less fortunate. So our ministry program is huge. I wanted to mention the last part of my presentation is we cannot do this without our community key partners. And our community key partners starts with the International Trauma Center. The International Trauma Center came to us a couple years ago. We were able to launch the Hannah Institute, which provides the training and consultation in evidence-based trauma-informed care, along with the strategic partnerships of that organization. Our 10,000 Degrees, again, this is big help from our follow-on alumni relationships folks, as we get 2 to 4 students a year. They're able to get these scholarships and recipients of the 10,000 Degrees Kastner Scholarship. This allows our students to be able to concentrate on school and not have to be working full-time. Santa Rosa Junior College has helped us as well. And I will mention the last one I will highlight on is our Sonoma Valley Community Health Center, because the Sonoma Valley Community Health Center, we actually are able to work with the 2 nurses on campus, which has been super because, again, the ever-changing medical field from practices and policies, Medi-Cal, is huge when we're working with this clientele. So, again, as you can see on that sheet there, we do have a lot of our community folks that support us. It's on our webpage, so I encourage folks to come to the webpage as well. We are excited about working closely with these groups, and I just wanted to give you a short version of what we do. Well, thank you.
All right, thanks, Scott. So let me take you through the next few slides, and so the first thing we wanted to talk a little bit about is why does trauma-informed care matter in group homes and places like Hannah? And I guess the first thing that probably may go without saying, hopefully we're preaching a little bit to the choir, but that trauma and adversity and grief and violence and inequity and marginalization are the stories of our kids' lives. These are what bring these experiences, what bring these kids into this system. And what happens, I think, once kids come into the system, we kind of are aware that these are kids who have suffered from abuse and neglect. And then miraculously over time, we forget that. And we start to use the same old kinds of strategies like shaming and blaming and coercion to try to control kids that seem a little bit dysregulated and difficult to manage. So my sense is that we really can't contemplate providing services. Hello? Okay. We really can't contemplate providing services that promote recovery if we're not really in tune with the impact of trauma, not just on the kids that we work with, but on the staff who work with them, on the organizations that work with them, and frankly, the entire system. So we need to be thinking a lot about this issue of trauma. Trauma is contagious, and feelings are contagious. And so when we're working with really disrupted and dysregulated kids, it dysregulates staff, and can dysregulate entire organizations, and frankly can dysregulate the entire system. So if we're not mindful and intentional about the work we're doing and how we do it, it is highly likely, and frankly it will happen, that organizations that serve people who have been traumatized become trauma organized. And so we really need to think about what are the things that we need to put in place in the system to make sure that we remain transparent, that we remain connected, that we support each other, that we're thinking, we're using our thinking brains rather than our reptilian brains when we're making decisions. So all those things need to be considered in the organizational work. And fundamentally, what we miss, I think, too, is that trauma experiences are generally grounded in abuse of power. And so when we create systems that practice coercion and restraint and seclusion, we continue to abuse power. And what we talk about here is shifting what we do from doing things to kids to doing things with kids and families. And our kids and our families have had lots of people in their lives do things to them. It's time that we stand next to them and do things with them. And so the focus in this work of youth voice and choice is not just a nice thing to do, it's an essential thing to do. What people need when they've had trauma experiences is they need to find their power and they need to find their mastery. And you can't do that by dictating to people. You have to be able to give them choice and hear their voice, even when it sounds, even when they start using it, it sounds a little bit troubling or rebellious or whatever. We have to be able to hear that voice. So before I transition to the next slide, Ken, is there anything you wanted to add to this, or is Ken there? Okay, I guess that's a no. All right, so I'll transition to the next slide. And this is really kind of what are some of the things that make TIC really challenging in congregate care. And the first one, which I've already covered, is the high prevalence of traumatic experiences on the part of our consumers. So every kid that we work with here comes to us with a trauma history of some sort. And frankly, the whole process of coming into residential care is traumatic. For a kid to leave his home or leave a previous placement is a traumatic experience in and of itself. The other thing that I think we don't fully appreciate is that many of the folks who work in our facilities come with their histories as well. I referenced, working back east and doing the Sanctuary Institute, and we had a conference one time. We asked people to do the ACE survey, and we had 350 people at the conference. And what we saw, when these were all providers, these were all people who worked in residential care, and their ACE scores and their experiences of trauma and adversity were twice that of the actual original ACE score. So people come to this work very often because they have a survivor mission and they want to help and give back. Some bad things have happened to them, and sometimes people come to this work because they're still trying to work stuff through. And so very often the people who are doing the work come with their own experiences, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a thing, and it's a thing that we need to be aware of and manage when it comes up. There's pretty high turnover rates in our industry, and so once you finally get somebody on board and you get them trained up, they disappear. And so so those are challenges in our industry as well. The other thing that I think is also a real challenge for us is that we engage in really deeply intimate relationships with kids. You're living with them. You're helping them to get dressed. You're serving as a parent in many ways. And it's very difficult to ask people to do that level of intimate work and yet remain really carefully bounded in that work. And so that's another challenge, that it's easy to step over the line, or it's also easy to withdraw and disappear on kids. So that's another challenge for us. And this isn't final, but another major challenge I think in the work that we do is risk aversion and change. And I try to remind our staff all the time here is that we are in the change business. We are not in the control business. And for kids to change, for anybody to change, it requires risk. You got to take risk. You got to give them experiences that you kind of go, do we really want them to do this? And where they may fail, they may fall on their face, but that is part of the change process. And so one of the challenges I think very often in places like this, we worry too much about control, we worry too much about compliance, and as a result, we don't take enough risks because something terrible could happen. And I think that really thwarts potential change. What I mentioned already, I think there's a long history of coercion and control in this industry, and very often our staff and our organizations often equate success with compliance. So if a kid is behaving well, we're making strides, and that is not always the case, because sometimes kids can behave well when they're coerced, but they don't take it on board. They don't make it their own. They just follow the rules. And what we want to do with our kids is make sure that they're leaving us with skills and capabilities that are that they can walk out of here with, not just things that they do while they're with us. And then lastly, I think if your place is like ours, it is virtually impossible to get everybody together in a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week facility to actually get people on the same page, operating in the same way. Sometimes requires being in the same space to talk and strategize, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do in our system. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and I'm sure you're facing too as you're trying to take this stuff on board. So the next slide here, and these are for me, for my money, these are kind of key concepts that I really want, and each one of these probably is a webinar, so I'm going to really fly through this, but just some things I want to put in your ear around some of the challenges that we face and some of the key concepts that I think can help us move through this transition in organizations. The first one is really understanding parallel process. And when and fundamentally what happens when systems work closely together, so the system that is the kids and the staff, when people work in close proximity to each other, systems work in close proximity to each other, they begin to feel and act similarly. So one of the things that I always pay attention to is that when things start to amp up with the kids, all right, behaviors start to escalate, there's incidents escalating, there's more violence, there's more struggles, the first thing to do is look at the staff, not just the kids. All right, so, and a lot of times what we try to do is clamp down on the kids. Very often what the kids do is they act out the conflicts that are occurring at the staff level. And that's not, that's not to vilify the staff. It is just when people work in close proximity to each other, stuff comes up. And if we don't work out our stuff, it finds its way into the client population. The kids are the canaries in the coal mine. And so our staff need to be on the same page when we're in conflict. It's just like family dynamics. When parents are in conflict, that will create problems for kids. And so we need, when we see amp up in behavioral issues with kids, generally speaking, there's something going on with the staff. And so that parallel process, I think, is really important to take a look at. And if you get an opportunity at all to Google collective disturbance, that is very often what happens when there's a disturbance at the staff level. It translates down into the client level, in an organization like ours. The other key concept is traumatic reenactment, and that is, for my money, it is probably the most important thing to understand is that our kids are compelled to repeat. Our families are compelled to repeat. Trauma often is repetitious. People loop in the past, and they're very good at cueing us to behave in a way that is familiar to them. So my mentor, Sandy Bloom, used to always say, whatever your instinct is in responding to kids' behavior, do the opposite. Now that doesn't always work, but very often what kids are cueing us to do is to be either abusive, all right, or retaliatory, to marginalize them, to punish them, or to avoid them. And so when you have that, when you feel that compulsion to do something with a kid, often that compulsion is coming out of that need to repeat, and you're being cued by the young person who you're working with. So that idea of trying to think about your response and choose a response rather than to go to a default response is really crucial. The third concept that we're working through here is to really broaden our definition of safety. And very often we think about safety in organizations like ours as physical safety. But we need to understand that safety operates on other dimensions. There's moral safety that you have to tell kids the truth. There is emotional safety. The kids have to feel that they're respected, that they're treated as individuals. And social safety, that they're safe in the group, they're safe with each other. And too often, what we miss is when there are breaches in physical safety, when physical violence erupts in our facilities, it is always, and I will repeat that, it is always because of breaches in social, emotional, and moral safety. People, even the most violent people in the world, are not violent all the time. They are cued to be violent by these transgressions. And I would say, and again, not again to slam staff, or because I am one of those people, I am a staff member here, that the adults in a facility, or I should say that the kids in the facility aren't the only ones who perpetrate violence. Adults like me are just more sophisticated at how we do it, all right? And so when kids act out violently, they are often cued by gaps in the sort of the social safety network in an organization. And I think that's something we need to take a look at. And then my last comment here is the other thing that we're always challenged with here is that safety does not equal comfort. And I would put to you that the work that we do, if you're comfortable, if you're exquisitely comfortable in doing the work in residential care, you're probably not doing it right. This is really uncomfortable work. Change is really uncomfortable. And I think sometimes we all get this sense of like, oh, I don't feel safe in this work, when in fact, I don't feel comfortable in this work. All right. And so as managers and supervisors and staff people, we always need to question that. Am I really unsafe, or am I just really uncomfortable? And change really requires discomfort. So that's an important distinction. So for the rest of these issues, I'm going to turn this over now to my colleague, Dr. Smith, and she's going to finish up for us.
Hello. So I'm going to move us towards the things that are kind of more one-on-one, but can also be thought of in terms of overall systems. So the first key one, which is both for a system in terms of co-regulation, as Brian had said, as the staff goes, so do the guys. What the guys are pulling us into, that's how the staff will respond. Neurobiologically, we have a concept for that called co-regulation. So on an individual level, what it means, we all have been in the room with someone who's extremely depressed or someone who's extremely angry, anxious, and our mood changes, our physiological state changes for that. And what we want to do is, rather than for us it's the guys, but your residents to be regulating you want to do it the other way around. So instead of them getting us all upset when they're kind of arguing or fighting, or if they're not doing anything, how can we use ourselves as that tool to regulate them into kind of the area of tolerance we want them to be in? And so what becomes important, therefore, is like your self-care and being able to just take a breath. Another key concept is compassionate curiosity. It's a phrase I heard before, and I like this idea in terms of applying. The compassionate piece really saying that, really understanding that our guys are doing the best they can, and that I care about you. And the curiosity really is that our goal is not to change their behavior, but to understand behavior, or at least our very first instinct should be to understand, not to change it. And being curious. When a behavior happens, ask why it happened before you start bringing in the consequences or what should be done about it or how we should fix it. Just ask. And that should be the very first instinct. And it's hard when you have a lot of people to want to spend that, to take that time or instincts. I did it the other day, as I assumed that the guy was the aggressor and that he was the one who started it, and I needed to back up and say, hey, why did this happen? And I found out a little different piece of the story. And then my passion is, my expertise, my passion is neurophysiological impacts. So the reason we need to start with understanding, the reason we need to co-regulate, is there are so many ways that the experience of ACEs, complex trauma, child maltreatment impacts the brain and our heart rate system, our autonomic system. Basically, many trauma survivors, not all, but are wired to either to overreact even to a small stressor and very slow to calm down. Their brain is wired in a way where it's hard to think about the consequences of your actions or what happened before, or even if you're in danger or not. And these are really robust findings, and we need to know that. For example, we know that there's changes in hemisphere integration. We know that there's changes in neurotransmitters, more excitatory, less inhibitory transmitters. The limbic system, you're more primed to do fight-flight response and less primed to think about your actions and if even you need to act. The HPA axis, so cortisol can be flooding through your body. And then the autonomic nervous system, so you're on fire for your heart rate to go up and to respond, and it takes a long time to calm down. Some people are just so extreme that they're shut down completely, so that's the end of that. And to go back to even that safety does not equal comfort, that piece, growth happens neurophysiologically as well when in the repair. So you don't want to keep people, the goal isn't to make sure everyone's calm and content all the time. One, it's impossible. But two, neurophysiologically, you can't do these changes unless there's a repair. So it's okay. To being okay if someone gets yelled or angry or throws something. To be okay if someone is shut down, because that's where the healing is going to occur. It's our ability to bring them back. Oh, and then Ken, did you have anything before we keep going about where we are? Right, moving right along.
Hang on 1 second, if you would, Stephanie. I think we have Ken connected, or we should. So at least he's showing. Ken, can you hear us?
It looks like he needs to. Did he hang up? Because it looks like he needs to.
Sounds like we're still struggling with Ken. Apologies there. Stephanie, why don't you go ahead?
Keep on through. So, as Brian mentioned, I think where we are in the process is squarely in the middle. So we're moving from a general buy-in to the idea of trauma-informed care to what does that mean on the everyday practice. The reason I know one other reason I know that we're in our process is we actually use the ARDIC, which is something I know Ken was going to speak to about something that encouraging other organizations to use. It's the assessment of trauma-informed care systems, and it's a Likert scale of 1 to 7, and all our scores are about 4.5, 5.5. So yes, we're squarely in the middle in terms of whether or not we, how we think about the guys in terms of how do we understand the behavior, how are we responding to the behavior, how if people feel confident that they know how to respond to the behavior. basically we have almost all like the idea of trauma-informed care that work here, but still struggling with that actually means. So moving away from this idea of, okay, what is the trauma-informed way of doing the things we always did? And that's not quite trauma-informed care. It's a completely culture change, and it's a mind shift change. So it isn't trauma-informed because now we give the guy 4 chances or 5 chances or 6. What really makes it trauma-informed care is there's nothing about chances out there. It's really about how do I understand, how do I respond, that piece. As Brian had mentioned, we're chipping away at coercive practices. It's in our DNA. So how is it that instead of the first instinct, especially when things get really difficult, when someone's behavior just seems to be constantly be someone that staff is being pulled towards because they're doing things all the time, how do we, even in that piece, not be coercive? How do we make sure we don't make privileges and be able to go out and be able to see your family and be able to do things not based on how you acted towards staff 4 or 5 days ago? That really piece of, are there other ways? And when that's gone, it makes it very hard to figure out now what else we do, which is now the second piece is we are establishing those collaborative practices. For example, the team came up with the staff on their own a couple of months ago met because they were concerned about the uptick in substance abuse on our campus because we have an open campus. And so they decided to meet, and their idea, rather than to be coercive and say we're going to kick guys out in peace, they came up with this idea of, okay, why don't we every time have a team meeting, and we'll talk about why did it happen, what's going on, and what can we do to help each individual person. So therefore, our structure and our response, it's not that there's no response, but the response is we're all going to get together and figure it out, and it'll be more individualized. And trying not to do those swings, because sometimes we swing from, there's this misunderstanding that trauma-informed means there's no consequences, and then sometimes we over-consequence. So it's not that it's no consequences. It's that you do this type of thing. You collaborate, you talk, you understand what's happening, what can we do to change it. Even just calling it out and noticing what someone is doing is a response. We're creating an entire, like I said, a culture change, that culture of trauma-informed care and responsiveness. I'm hearing it in the language that people are doing. Is they're no longer saying, hey, they're never coming to my door and trying to convince me to kick someone out. They're coming and say, hey, what can I do to help? What could we do better? What does this guy need? I really want to work with them. And I'm seeing that language all the time about what can staff do, not what does the guy need to do to show us they want to change, but what can we do to help them get there. People are coming up with ideas of policies, of having things like rituals and things they can do on a regular basis to help regulate the guys. Really that change in culture in terms of how am I going to respond, what is I'm going to do. And this one's probably the hardest one, is in terms of embracing and managing chaos. Someone recently gave an analogy to me in terms of change is like a trapeze. You're on the trapeze moving from one to the other, and at one point you got to let go. And that is extremely frightening to do. And so sometimes we're still swaying, like I said, from the coercive to not doing anything, and what trauma-informed care is in the middle. You have to let go. And that increases anxiety, but it can also increase anxiety. And to be okay to be in that stage. We also have to learn new behavior management because the threat is off the table. It takes time to change. And what sometimes happens is people have it in general, and then this one particular guy or this particular incident will kind of send people off into concern again. And how do you stay with it even in those situations? One thing we're also trying to do, which wasn't on this slide, but really trying to involve the residents more in their consequences, and even in setting up those cottage rules. That's starting to happen. Is what do you think should happen? How can you make this better? And then I'll talk about what are some of the things we did to help us at least get halfway. Really important is that board support. You really need, it's not just a financial issue, it really is more about hanging with you, saying, yes, we're going to do this, and being okay when things do start to get messy, when maybe there is a temporary uptick, or at least a perception. It's not always an uptick in behaviors, it's a perception of that piece. One big one, the reason perception is there is kind of number 3, which We don't suspend. We also don't terminate as much. We have moved from a 50% unplanned exit, where we said this isn't working, to only about 9 to 12% this year. That's a lot of work. That means those guys are staying with us, and that board needs to be okay when people are starting to feel uncertain about what's going on. We did what a lot of people have done, and probably a lot of you on the phone have done this in your organization. We've actually trained on trauma. We may have done a little more on training on the neurobiology of this, but we're really not doing a train and pray. We're not saying train the staff and hope it somehow sticks and people got that. What comes is the follow-up on the training, the constant talking and the weaving of this, of knowing, talking about how does someone's trauma history impact what's going on? What is their brain doing in all those team meetings? So constantly using it in our ability to understand and conceptualize. We have a Salesforce system that we're using to help make sure that people can always have access and remember what is the trauma history, so they can keep that in mind. I already mentioned the changing coercive practices, so a lot more in terms of meetings, and our meetings are no longer recommitment meetings. We don't talk about someone's coming back. When we do have to have someone take a break a little, we don't say, hey, now you got to come back and tell us what's going to be different. It really is about what can we do differently, what's a different plan, can we do this for you? We did a lot of training on self-regulation and calming. This is the first summer I was here. We tried to focus on this first. We had someone that came in before me to focus this on terms of grounding, breath, self-care. We've brought in things like tapping, yoga, trying to find different ways and to help with that co-regulation. How can you come to work and how can you take little breaks at work to get yourself kind of grounded again so you can be the one who's doing most of the co-regulating. We have a clinical staff here, so we have started to bring in evidence-based practices in terms of doing the trauma work, and that's ongoing. That's both individual, family work, make sure we're having evidence-based practices that are trauma-specific in all those areas, and including and during assessment. We eliminated the status system. Not all residents do this, and I don't think it's necessarily necessary. Brian, I may disagree on that. But what I will say is it can often become weaponized and reactive. It allows us to be, it's almost our default. If the status system is there, it can serve as a crutch, and we'll use that in order to change behavior. And it might be the first thing we go to, like, oh, you're yelling at me and refusing to do what I asked you. Okay, you lost the status. It becomes very weaponized, and it keeps us sometimes from actually moving towards understanding what's going on, doing that step of, hey, why did you just cuss me out? What's going on? And that piece of, understanding what can we do next and how would it help you, and maybe even helping them get to that next level, which gives us situational guides. We've actually created little scenarios to what to do when that happens. So when that person cusses you out, refuses to do everything, and throws down whatever the task is, you go, hey, calm down first, take a breath, regulate, neurophysiologically informing, and then let's talk and say, why did it happen, and can I help you? Maybe, hey, can I make your bed with you? Can I help take out the trash with you? Whatever their task is, do it with them. And having those guides where you really step through and see how that would look on a case examples. Creating more trauma-informed models of programming. So a sample group home schedule. People have come in terms of, okay, if I came in, the first thing I would do is a co-regular activity. This is what we're going to do next. It's not just about rules, but what the schedule would look like. What could be the activities you're doing? We have at least 2 staff that have been working on their own and in charge of the group homes that are looking at those trauma-informed models and bringing them to me to consult and see if they fit. A key piece was definitely train and support supervisors. You really need the people who are directly working with the line staff and see them every day and are working on a daily basis to be able to move the mindset, to be able to not ask your staff when something happens in the group home, the instinct can't be to ask your staff what happened, what did you do? The instinct really needs to be the supervisor going, okay, what happened? What did the guy say happened? Can you understand why it happened? So our first question will be to help the staff ask why it happened versus what did you do? And that really needs to happen on the supervisor level to really create that culture of debriefing, non-defensiveness. This is going to be a lot of trial and error. Some things we do are going to work, some things are not. Sometimes they're going to work on some days, some they're not. And the supervisor creating that culture where people feel safe to say, I don't know, or this guy blew up on me, and not the first defense being, but I didn't do anything to make it happen, or it was his fault. To be okay with saying, hey, I don't know what happened, or I was probably didn't handle that the best way I could. Let's figure out a different way next time. We also did a lot of training on focus and continue to focus on social justice and equity. So these gentlemen are not just coming in with their trauma histories that are individualized, but they have a society that views them a certain way, that treats them a different way. We are part of that system in terms of how we see and view guys. And so we've done training on cultural humility, microaggressions, what are our own values. When we say a guy needs to act a certain way or behave a certain way, is that coming from our own cultural values? So really spending some time focusing on that. And continuing to replace counter-aggressive practices with assertive relation strategies. I mentioned the substance abuse one earlier. Our practice, we're still a little bit in the middle. There still is, after the meeting, a little bit of loss of privileges, 7 weeks you can't go out, can't go home, things like that. But really trying to move of what would be most helpful. Maybe for this guy, he's less likely to do the behaviors you're concerned about if he's going out more, if he's engaged in work, if he's going home more. And maybe for someone else that makes it worse. So really being relational about it. And the assertive piece is important. You're not just letting things go. You are noticing every time. You're calling it on every time. You're saying, hey, we just spoke about this. Hey, what's going on with you? And we're also trying to build neuroregulatory practices in a day-to-day activity. So how is it that we can, through just the fun stuff we do during the day, fix some of those neurophysiological impacts? So for example, we do a lot of 3-6 deep breathing. That helps calm the system down. I was recently speaking to someone for equine therapy, and we're going to be able to take our guys there on a regular basis. We've had someone come in that does kickboxing, yoga, stepping. I've talked to a glass blower, and then things that people are doing in their practices in terms of rituals and breath and meditation and mindfulness. These things constantly get your residents so they're not walking around at a pre-boil level where any stressor can set them off, but really trying to do daily practices to bring them down to flat water. So it takes a long time to boil over. And then revamping the policies and practices. The school, for example, created a peer response system. So it used to be that you just kick someone out of the classroom right away. Now it's giving the teachers, what can the teachers do in the classroom? And if that's not working, then the next step is to then call the clinician. And then the next step is then we have a large team meeting. So really having steps so we're not escalating from I'm having difficulty with this guy to they have to be out of here. And really creating a tiered system. Looking at our staff schedules and structures so you can have more of these team meetings and talk to each other more and join together. And then, so I will twist on that and tell where we're going next.
Good. Is that me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is Brian again. So what we're trying to do in terms of our next steps is to do as much as we can around fostering positive connections in the organization. And that has been, it's been fraught. I want to be very clear that this is not a silver bullet. And as you make changes, one of the problems with making change is stressful. And people, all of us react in difficult ways under stress. So making those connections can be difficult, but it really has to be the core of the work. Fundamentally, that is the antidote to trauma. People who have been traumatized are alone, they're isolated, and for all of us to deal with stress, we need to work more effectively together. The last slide had a picture of Robert Ander, and if you've ever heard Robert Ander speak, he's one of the principal investigators in the ACE study. He says that we're built for love, and I think, and it's how we've survived as a species is through connection. And so it's how we'll survive as an organization as well. We haven't yet fully built the TIC stuff into our onboarding and our orientation processes. We're doing that a little bit, but we need to do a much better job of that. And again, this is counterintuitive. So most people come in to an organization like ours thinking that rewards and punishments, carrots and sticks, are what work. And so if we're going to reorient people, we got to do it up front so that people come in and are very clear about what we're doing and what our values are. Stephanie mentioned before the sales force, so we've just revamped our whole information management system. And what we haven't done yet is we really haven't gotten to a place where we're really managing more effectively with the use of data. We're starting to put our toe into that, but that is, the place I came from. We did a lot more of that in terms of, how kids were doing and based on incident reporting and, standardized measures. And we're starting to move in that direction, and we'll probably be moving in that direction more this year. I think one of the things that we also need to put in place here is some root cause analysis or some processing of unfavorable outcomes. So when bad things happen, what I talked about before, this notion of reenactment, I think it's important to pull people together and talk about what happened and figure out what was some of the things that may have precipitated that event and see if we can weed them out of our system. What we haven't done particularly well as an organization, and again, we're not a child welfare program per se, but our family work has not been everything that it could be. Our family work and our family involvement, and so we're taking some steps over the last year to train our staff on some models around that, and now this coming year, really looking to implement more family contact and more connection with families. And then the other thing that we probably don't do enough and need to is that we don't celebrate our successes. And I think and I'm probably the most guilty of this, is we attend to threat as a species. And so what I tend to see is the gaps rather than the wins. And Scott and Stephanie have been very good at reminding me that things are changing, and I think we need to celebrate that more when we get some wins. So I think that's an important piece in your organizations. So just to wrap up, this is a quote from Robert Macy, and Robert is a guy that's done some work with us over the last few years to help us on this journey towards trauma-informed practices. And the quote is, as waves are the practice of water, so violence is the practice of trauma. And I think we got to remember that, and I grew up on the beach. I grew up in Rockaway on the Atlantic Ocean, and we used to body surf in the summer. And we'd get in the water on 129th Street at a really rough surf, and you'd take a wave in, and you'd get out of the water. You were on 132nd Street, and the water moved you, and the waves move you. When you get in the water with these kids, it moves you, and you don't always feel it. You don't always realize it. You don't know you drifted 3 blocks down. So we are in the water with these kids, and you can't get in the water with them without getting wet. So our kids, they move us. They bring out stuff in us that we don't always know is there, both positive and negative. And this is very emotional, very difficult work. And so we need to understand that it takes really brave and courageous people to help kids make the changes they need to make. So, just, for all of us to realize this is part of what the work is about, is really getting in there and getting into the surf with these guys. So, so that's our piece. It is, as I said, it is I think we have a hopeful message that we are far from perfect. We've been at this 3.5 years, so we got a little bit of a head start from where the state put a pin in this. and we still got a long way to go. So be patient, and be patient with yourselves, be patient with your staff, be patient with your kids, and but it's a journey worth taking. We're grateful we're on it journey. Okay, so I don't
Brian,
know.
thank you.
What do you want to do?
Yes, thanks for that. I love the quote from Robert Macy. That's a powerful metaphor. I think I want to check in one more time and see if we've got Ken finally connected. Ken, are you with us and have a couple of reflections by chance?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you're good now.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
Oh, sorry that for the technical issues. I want to thank Scott and Stephanie and Brian. Wow, what an incredible presentation, what incredible work, and a role model for all of us. Just wanted to say a couple things. For those of you who don't know, 129th to 132nd Street, that's New York. Just wanted to make clear. Anyway, I just wanted to say a couple of things. Our system is designed to achieve the outcomes we get. And I just want to put a pin in everything that was just presented, that it's just not about training our line staff to do something different, but it's actually about a paradigm shift for all of us. And this includes addressing and including structural racism and oppression embedded in our policy and practices, and the way that forms itself in both explicit and implicit biases. At the core of what I think this presentation is telling us is that trauma destroys relationships. And it destroys relationships not just between the line staff and the kids and their families and our communities, but it destroys relationships at all levels, including for those of us that work with the counties and the state. We're very used to blaming each other and holding each other, quote unquote, accountable without being in relationship with each other and sharing risk and sharing this change process. So we are really in a moment together where if trauma destroys relationships, then we're in a moment where we need to use relationships to heal. And this moment is designed really not to be stress-free, and it's designed, as I think the presenters really well said, is that it's going to be uncomfortable. Unfortunately, the way we've defined accountability is we defined accountability by someone's accountability to someone else, but we haven't looked at our own accountability to ourselves. And this means that in this moment, leadership doesn't need to just show up and check the box in terms of I went to the trauma-informed training, but leadership has to ask themselves the question, what do I do differently each and every day? Because the staff is watching you. They're watching every move. And if you're on your device during a training or you're not showing up, then the staff knows that it's not important. And we have to have courageous conversations with each other. And that includes not just blaming your state or county representative, but trying to get into a different conversation with them about the work and try to share the risk. And last, I want to say that I know how hard this is. But I also know how important it is, because if we don't make this change, we will have the same outcomes. And I want to thank the state for really making this a top priority, and Hannah for moving the needle in the work. I really appreciate the work you've done, and Brian and Sandy have been role models for me. So let's move this forward together.
Ken, thank you for that. Really helpful context and perspective on the presentation. Thanks also to Brian, Scott, and Stephanie. This is really terrific stuff. We don't have time for very many questions. We may have time for one or two, but let me first, one of the questions is actually a lead to our final slide, which you should be seeing. So someone asked, what is the name of the assessment tool? And the Department of Social Services is exploring the use of the Attitudes Related to Trauma-Informed Care, known as ARTIC, as a testing vehicle or an organizational assessment tool. We have, I believe, 2 agencies identified for some early beta testing this year, and there'll be more information coming forward about that. If you'd like to get a head start, potentially, and to see where that tool might be effective for you as an organization, the link there to the Traumatic Stress Institute is available there in the PowerPoint deck, which we will also make available with Hannah's permission. We'll send the PowerPoint deck around to the attendees. Let me take just one question and ask for just a little bit of elaboration, probably for Stephanie or Brian. Are there evidence-based practices which you have found to be kind of most in sync or most effective in a trauma-informed environment? What clinical interventions, if there are some? Can you talk about that?
Organizationally, and I hate to say because I don't want to leave other ones out. This is the one I'm most familiar with. Doesn't mean there's others. ARC has been used a lot. It's Margaret Blaudstein's and Christine Kenneberg's, and theirs has been used in terms of residential overall. In terms of specifically clinical work, some of the ones we looked at, because we have adolescents, so we actually looked at things like Sparks, which is DeRosa, Habib, and what is Pelkovic. That's a group work model. Other ones we've looked at things like we're going to bringing in Saltzman to do traumatic grief, because a lot of our folks have experienced, violence, murder, that piece of it. There's a lot of work down in LA by Cheryl Langton's group in terms of adolescent trauma piece. There's also STARE. There's folks out of Marlene Cloyter's work, which is a narrative model. They're definitely out there. If you want, you can look at things like the NCTSN, National Child Traumatic Stress Network.org. They'll have a list of evidence-based clinical protocols for trauma-informed work. Another one I know we're looking into for family work is we're currently using Let's Connect for skills training, and then we're also looking into it's Laura Kizel's work. I always forget, like strengths in families and coping. But just look on the nctsn.org website, and they have a list of evidence-based protocols specific to trauma work.
Yeah, and I would add, my background is more on the organizational piece. So, I've worked a lot with the sanctuary model with Sandy Bloom, and I found that to be very effective in many of the organizations we worked with back east. The other individual model is certainly for child welfare, which I really liked, was a guy named Richard Kagan, who did Real Life Heroes, and it's really all about connection for kids, who are in the system, who very often are very disconnected from family and from loved ones and community. So that's another, I think it's another really positive intervention.
And all those that both Brian and I mentioned are all on that nctsn.org website. They're all part of that network.
Thanks for that. So in the interest of time, we won't take any more online questions. If you have particular interest in a specific question which you have just submitted, feel free to also send that to the state CCR webpage. There's a technical assistance inbox for CCR. Yeah, the main CCR Q&A webpage. We'll try to get those answered for you. Appreciation again to Ken, Brian, Scott, and Stephanie for their time and expertise today. We hope that you will join us for the next STRTP Organizational Leadership webinar, currently scheduled for May 10th at 11 a.m. We'll have a presentation on partner-based intake and referral processes. We hope you'll join us then May 10th at 11 for our next Best Practices webinar. Thank you very much.